Welcome back to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, where you'll find information on what's going on the North Fork of Long Island. We'll be focusing on issues and opportunities going on in the community, as well as people and stories from the present and the past. I'm your host, Christopher Bianchi, and for episode 13, we have Poppy Johnson. She has been out on the North Fork for quite a while now and has been involved in the community and has been the adult librarian and assistant director at the Floyd Memorial Library. And we talked to her about her time growing up in Greenwich Village and what her interests were, especially in the arts, getting out of high school and going to Paris and coming back and going to art school, and what it was like for her as an artist living in Manhattan, particularly in Tribeca, and what the art scene was like, and then how she eventually made her way out to Greenport, and also what she thinks of Greenport today. So I hope you enjoy episode 13 with Poppy Johnson. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast today.
Well, thank you for asking me. I'm happy to do it.
So, starting off, I just would like to ask where you were born and raised.
I was born and raised in Manhattan, New York City, Greenwich Village, on West 9th Street, between 5th and 6th. And it was a wonderful pre-war building, and we were on the 6th floor, nice high ceilings, fireplaces. Great. It was a beautiful apartment, but and we had elevator men, and all the elevator men, there were like 3 buildings together, and they were owned by somebody from some little town in Sicily. So he only hired elevator men who were extremely old and couldn't do anything else, and who were from this little town in Sicily. So it had a whole feeling to it.
Wow. And so, were your parents working?
Yeah. My mother and father met. They were both chemists. My father actually got a PhD at the University of Wisconsin, but discovered he wasn't really that interested in working in labs, and ended up working at Chemical Week magazine, which was a McGraw-Hill publication. And my mother had been working in chemistry. I mean, she got her degree in chemistry and had some kind of job, but then she worked at Chemical Week magazine, and then her story was that, she was in line for the editor job, and he was in line for the editor job, but then he asked her to marry him, and then he got the job.
Oh.
And she stopped working for a while. Well, but she always was a person who needed to do other things than besides staying home with small children.
Yes.
At some point, she discovered that.
But did you say they were both chemists? And did they meet in Wisconsin?
No, she was from New Jersey. They met at Chemical Week, yeah. Okay. And he came to the city to work for Chemical Week, and so, yeah, they met at Chemical Week.
And as you go further back with your parents, have you been able to trace your ancestry going back?
Oh, yeah. Sort of. I mean, my mother's side, the whole reason my name is Priscilla is from Priscilla Alden, because she's a great-great-great-great-great-grandmother of mine or something, and she's the one who said, "Speak for yourself, John," on the Mayflower. So, and before that, they were stiff-necked Protestant people from England, farmers basically, and Puritans, and so stiff-necked apparently that then first they were in Massachusetts, and then the next generation was like so ornery that they had to move to Rhode Island, and then the next generation was so ornery that they had to move to Connecticut, and then they basically stayed in Connecticut for a long time. And then I've got one relative who fought in the Revolutionary War, and that's when their original house got burnt down by neighbors who were Tories and everything. So he had to rebuild. But yeah, so that's one side of my family. I always used to refer to myself as half Swedish and half plain. My mother's side being the plain ones. Oh. Just because they were just plain Americans or something.
Yes.
But on my father's side, he's Swedish, and I did that ancestry thing and figured out some stuff because his thing was very convoluted because he was adopted. His mother, my grandmother, died in the 1918 influenza epidemic when he was just born. So he was his father couldn't take care of him and gave him to some elderly relatives who didn't have children. I mean, they weren't that elderly, but they had any children. So he was brought up as a only child in Rockford, Illinois, and he didn't even know he was adopted until much later in his life. But then we sort of figured it out, but he didn't really. I mean, he was. I guess he was always somehow angry about having been abandoned or whatever. You know, it was kind of complicated. But my sister and a niece and I were all able to go to southern Sweden to the town which is named Floby. Floby. Where I saw the house of his grandmother, and and various things, and we met somebody who was a distant relative of some sort, and of course he only spoke Swedish and we didn't, but it was pretty neat. But and that's his mother's side of the family. His father's side of the family is much harder for me to figure out, and I keep coming up with dead ends, but they lived in a very northern part of Sweden. There was a story that his father was like a Laplander or something, which I thought was very exciting, but according to the DNA stuff, there doesn't seem to be too much indigenous thing going on.
For records or just finding records.
And also just trying to figure out what were people doing up there. I mean, I guess there may be mining. There was like steel and stuff. So I guess people were doing mining up there. But so I mean, I just trying to figure out what their lives would be like there, and it's tricky.
Were you able to where they arrived into?
Ellis Island, all that stuff. I see all the records of. They actually, it's funny. They came and then they went back and then they came back again. Some of them. I mean, they traveled. There were a lot of children in Hulda. Hulda is my grandmother. It was Hulda and Eric and Ingmar or somebody. Anyway, they all left home and they all came to America, and they came together at some point, and then one came back, and they kind of went back and forth. It was interesting to me, but. I mean, I guess one thing I was trying to figure out was like, why were they all leaving Sweden in 1912? I mean, they had this farm, but I guess the farm maybe just couldn't sustain all of them.
Yeah, because I remember hearing about a lot of Scandinavians moving over in the 1800s, but you said this was
1905 was one time, and then 1912 was. I mean, some of the older brothers came in 1905, I think, and then went back, and Hulda came in 1916, I think, maybe, or I don't remember. My father was born in 1917, and she had just come over, and then she got the flu, and then she died. But the story had been that they wanted her to stay there and marry, like, the boy from the next farm over, because that's the peasant way of getting a bigger farm. But that she didn't love him, so she had to go and strike her fortune elsewhere. But it's another romantic story, like Priscilla Alden.
Well, that's interesting. Did your dad? He was an orphan, but what was his family that he grew up with, were they Swedish or was...
They were Swedish.
They were Swedish.
They were distant relatives of some sort.
Oh, okay.
But they're the ones, that's how I get the name Johnson. It was from that. But his father's real name was Hellstrom. So,
and moving forward, so your parents met in New York City, working at
Chemical Week, yeah.
Chemical Week. How did they end up moving to Greenwich Village as a place to live?
Not sure, really, but I mean, it was just one of the places that they found an apartment. I guess my mother had been living maybe in a, you know, how women in this is the 40s, right? And, there were like these hotels for working women. I mean, she lived at home with her parents for a little while after she graduated, but she didn't really want to live in New Jersey. And, you know, she wanted to be part of New York City. So I think she had roommates or, you know, stayed in these hotels that were for women.
And were you an only child, or did you have
No, I was the oldest, but then I had a little sister 3 years younger and a little brother 5 years younger.
And how would you describe living in Greenwich Village as a kid?
Oh, it was wonderful. I mean, it was all I knew, so of course it felt wonderful to me. But I remember very vividly going to Washington Square Park all the time, and I had those roller skates that were just metal that you had to do with a key. And made a lot of noise, and there was a wonderful statue of Garibaldi, and there was a hill, and you could like zoom down the hill very fast on your skates, and you could have snowball fights when it was snowing. And we had we went to the park. My mother was a strong believer in outdoor air and everything, and she was sort of an athlete. I still remember one time we were trying to play like touch football or something. We had some kind of a football, and she was just demonstrating something, and she showed us how to. She did a kick, and she kicked the football, and it went like all the way across the park practically, and then landed on somebody's car and dented it.
Oh. Wow. And so what time frame would this be when you were a kid?
Well, that would be the 50s.
The 50s, you were growing up in Greenwich Village.
Yeah. And
then what school did you attend?
Well, I went to St. Luke's School, which is over on Hudson Street. And though there was an exciting story about that because, well, when I was really little, my dad used to take me to school when I was little, and it was always fun walking with him because he was 6'4", and for every stride of his, I had to take like 3 or 4 strides or something. It was very, but he would walk me to school in the morning sometimes. But like then it became like this thing. I guess when I was 5 or 6. Well, first of all, I went to. Well, first of all, my mother had to start a nursery school because there weren't any nursery schools around, and she thought that I should be going to nursery school. So she started one at the Presbyterian Church on Fifth Avenue. So I would have playmates and have things to do and stuff. And then when I was old enough, I went to the. That was really a preschool nursery school. But anyway, then I got old enough to go to St. Luke's. So I went to St. Luke's for their nursery school, for which you had to be like 4. So then I was 4. I went to that nursery school. And the head of the school was also the kindergarten teacher. And after watching me in nursery school, she decided that probably I should go straight to first grade. And we never know whether it's because I was such a wicked child that she didn't want me in her class, or whether it was because I was truly somebody who should be skipped because of my ability to read and reason and things. So who knows? But anyway, I did skip a grade. So I went into first grade when I was 5.
And would your parents let you play outside by yourselves?
Well, I mean, we didn't really play outside by ourselves like right on Ninth Street because it really was, it was just I don't know, we just didn't do that. But I was allowed at some point, there was this whole plan. There was this boy who lived in our building. I think he was the same age, maybe he was a year older. But the idea was we were going to go to school by ourselves on the bus because there was a bus that went across. You could get it right on the corner of 9th Street and 6th Avenue, and it went down Christopher Street and let us right off. And that was very close to the school. And it only meant crossing 3 streets, I think. And we were very good at crossing streets. I mean, I knew how to look both ways and everything. So that was the plan. And and we did do it. But the first time we were supposed to do it, Jetty was somehow confused, and he knocked on the door of our neighbor. And our neighbor happened to be a man who wrote books. And Jetty went to the door and he knocked on it and he said, "Does Poppy live here?" And Arthur Gregor said, "No, she's next door." So anyway, then we went to school and stuff. But then Arthur wrote a book called "Does Poppy Live Here?" which then was turned into a musical, which then played on 7th Avenue for a while. And I got to play Poppy at the end. Wow. It took a few years. So by the time I did it, I was 7 or 8, I think. And then 9. And then I started towering over the lead, who was kind of short boy, but very talented. I mean, the part of Poppy was very easy because the whole play takes place. He goes to all these houses and he asks for me, and I'm not there, and there's all those other adventures, and including there's a big dog in it, played by a man in a dog suit. Wow. Yeah, it was fun. But then when I got to be too big, they let my sister play me, and I've always thought that was just not fair.
That your sister would end up playing the same.
Me.
Yeah. It's like, why does she get to play this? And so you were at St. Luke's all the way up until...
All the way up until... No, because then, let's see, when I was at St. Luke's, sometime there, they had a big scandal on game show TV, like Mark Van Doren or somebody. So they had these shows like Tic-Tac-Toe, I think was the main one, and then in Concentration or something like that. So they had these scandals. And so the way they decided to get rid of the scandals was to have adorable children from New York schools do these shows instead, because obviously children couldn't be bribed or whatever.
They just thought, oh, this will make it look better.
Right. but they were so clever, too, that they tested us a lot. And so we, anyway, I was chosen to be on these shows, one of these shows, or 2 of them or something. But anyway, and I was on and stuff, and I kept winning things, which was fun. But the thing is, they also, I mean, I think it was very organized. Like they would have a little blonde girl win, and then they would have a little dark-haired boy win, and then they would, they would switch it up. So when they wanted me to lose, they asked me questions about popular music that I had no idea. But anyway, so I was a little bit big for my britches there in St. Luke's, and they had tested me so much they kept thinking that I was really smart, so they decided that I should go to the Brearley School, which was up on the Upper East Side, and very academically rigorous, kind of all girls wear uniforms type of school.
When did you switch over there? What?
5th grade. And
what activities were you involved in there? Well, I guess you said a little bit at St. Luke's, but what about at the school you were transferred to?
Well, it was school.
It was school mostly.
Yeah. It was school. It was a very good school. And I look back on it, and I had some wonderful, wonderful teachers. But I was always a rather rebellious sort of a person, and I often didn't do my best work for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And by that point, we were also moving into the 60s, and there was a lot of interesting ferment going on. So I kept on starting various revolutions. Like, I was kind of didn't really like the uniform very much,
Mm-hmm.
and then I had a friend who got in trouble because she hid some alcohol belonging to her boyfriend in her locker, and they went into her locker, and I was like all about, you know, her private property,
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I did manage to get through. They didn't throw me out.
But you weren't involved in any clubs or activities?
We didn't have that kind of thing.
No.
Really, no. I mean, there was a lot of stuff that we had to do. And I did, I don't remember that there were choices, really. I mean, I was in all the plays.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah.
Were you drawn more towards the arts while you were?
Yeah. I actually won an art prize. That was the most surprising part of my graduation.
What was it for?
It's just for being a terrific artist.
Artist. It wasn't like you created a certain work in there.
No, this was all very. I mean, you didn't know about these things, and I mean, you sort of. I mean, you could kind of guess that the person was going to win the English prize if they'd been doing really well in English all the time. But there were other people who did art that seemed to be more admired than mine, but they ended up giving me the art prize, so that was nice.
Nice.
It's just that I was so surprised that instead of like shaking Miss Mitchell's hand, I just like went for the
And through your later years in school there, did you have any role model at the time that you could think of?
Well, I love my French teachers, and I love most of my English teachers, and I love the librarians. Yeah, I mean...
not any popular culture figures.
Oh, well, we were all Beatlemaniacs at a certain point.
Beatlemaniacs.
Yeah. I had a boyfriend who had traveled to England and came back with the first Beatle album that anybody had seen. I got it.
Wow.
It was pretty exciting.
And while you were in high school, you were still living in Greenwich Village. And how was it at that time? Because was that early 60s or mid-60s?
Mid-60s. And it was a big commute, for one.
That's, Upper East Side.
So, yeah, I could take... I mean, at first I always took the 5th Avenue bus uptown and then the 79th Street crosstown. But sometimes I took the subway. But it didn't seem to matter really much in terms of time. But it took a long time. And once you got off the subway at Lexington, you still had like 4 or 5 blocks.
Yeah.
It was long.
But would you describe, because Greenwich Village is known for being kind of a bohemian artist enclave, was that still there in the 60s, mid-60s?
Yeah. My parents used to go drink at the Cedar Tavern with Franz Klein and Willem de Kooning and people like that. They were sort of friends with a bunch of the arty types and stuff.
That were living there.
Around in there, yeah.
Did you remember going to any of those places and seeing the artists or a musician?
They didn't approve of children going to bars very much. No.
Like, we stay home. Or
no, I didn't. I didn't participate in that when I was really still under my parents. But I got out pretty soon, and then I did. But not those. I mean, then there was a whole other generation.
And while you were finishing up high school, did you know what you were thinking what you wanted to do?
Well, I knew I wanted to be an artist from the beginning, but my parents, who were about to get divorced in a very bitter sort of way, but they pretended that they weren't. And then they went and talked to the headmistress of the school, and the three of them conspired to, they decided that since I was already young from having skipped a grade and I had this terrible personality, that I shouldn't go to art school, and I should continue to live at home. So, which meant they wanted to send me to Barnard, which I didn't want to go to, and partly because I didn't want to live at home, because I was tired of living with my parents who were about to get divorced and taking care of my little brother and sister and everything. I mean, I wanted to go away. I wanted to go to art school, and they just wouldn't let me. So they made me go to Barnard, and so I dropped out and ran away and went to Paris.
Wow. But before you went to Barnard, you were thinking of an art school in New York City at the time?
No, well, I did apply to Cooper Union, but I didn't get in. But I didn't really want to go there anyway, because I knew I would have to stay at home. I mean, I didn't even have dormitories.
So at that point, you were like, I don't care if I leave New York City.
No, but I did. I wanted to go to the Rhode Island School of Design, or I think there was a school attached to the Chicago Art Institute or something like that that I wanted to go to. And I might have had a couple of other ideas, but it didn't matter what I thought.
They just wanted you to stay home and go to, and because there weren't really, it wasn't an art school.
No, I mean, I took a class, but it had to actually be at Columbia, because Barnard wasn't at that point offering the art kind of classes that I wanted to take. So was it after 1 year? Oh no, it was after 2.5 months.
After 2.5 months, you kind of just thought, I'm leaving.
I'm out of here. Yeah.
How did you end up doing that with just saying you're packing your bags and?
Well, it was trauma. I tell you, my mother hid my birth certificate so I couldn't get a passport. So I had to spend a lot of time going down to all these offices downtown to get a duplicate of my birth certificate, so then I could get a passport. So so that was one thing, and everybody was weeping and yelling and this and that. But I had made money the summer before.
You were working?
Yes, I was working actually at McGraw-Hill.
Oh.
My father had gotten me a job doing this thing. When I look back at it, I think of libraries a little bit, but it was a terrible, terrible job. They had this like a buyer's guide that had to be put into alphabetical order, but of course this is before computers really, and so it was endless cutting and pasting and anyway, so I had done that, and to go to work in those days in a place like that, it meant every day I was going on the subway wearing a dress and stockings and
it was very different.
Yeah. But anyway, I had some money. I had a little bit of money, and I had a boyfriend who helped me with my plans. But I managed to get a ticket on a freighter, a boat.
Oh, wow!
Yeah.
So you didn't fly.
I didn't fly. No, I took a boat.
Wow.
It's much more exciting that way.
Wow.
Yeah.
And where did you get on the boat from?
Right in Manhattan. I mean, it used to be on the west side. There's all those
tons of docks
and everything. Right. Wow. This was a Norwegian freighter, and it had room for a few passengers. And I took one of the rooms, and it took 14 days or something ridiculous to get across the Atlantic, and it was terrible weather. I was somewhat seasick, but.
What did you end up doing for the 14 days?
Oh, lying about and moaning mostly.
And where did it where did it first arrive?
Antwerp. And it arrived like Christmas Eve.
Wow.
So, maybe it was the day before Christmas Eve, but whatever it was enough of a holiday so that everybody in Europe was completely drunk.
Were things open, or most of the things were closed, but people were just partying and
and what I wanted to do was just get on. I didn't want to stay in Antwerp. I was going to Paris, so I wanted to get. So I ended up on a train going to Paris, which was very nice, actually.
And do you know why you were set on Paris?
Well, yeah, because of Picasso and
everything about
Paris
and art.
Yeah, art.
And what type of art were you doing? Did you have any specific art you were doing at the time, or was it variety?
All kinds of different things. And I think at that point everybody was doing a lot of different things, but I just wanted to make art.
And what were your plans in Paris once you arrived?
Oh, well, I was going to stay at this hotel, and it turned out the hotel was, anyway, I'll save that story for another time. But I did, I wanted to go to the Atelier d'Isset, which was Stanley William Hayter had this wonderful studio and people went there and they could do lithographs and all that kind of stuff, and all the great people had worked with him, and I figured I would just go there, and I figured he would take me because why not? But it turned out that he didn't feel like he had room, and that I was still only 17. I hadn't turned 18 yet, and he was like, "I can't have you here," and I was extremely disappointed, and probably I wept. I don't know. But anyway, I had names of people from my friend in New York, and also I think I've met a boy who was there who had actually managed to get himself in there. Well, he was 19. So I don't know. Somehow we managed for a while. I just stayed in Paris, but I didn't actually. I used to hang out partly because of this boy, and also this guy Krishna Reddy, who was a wonderful artist and who actually let us live in the little sort of studio he had right next to his house. So yeah, with Krishna and Chris and stuff, I would just sneak in because Hayter wasn't around all the time. So it was kind of, you could just go there and stay out of his way. It was fine, but I didn't get, I wasn't officially enrolled.
But you were able to do kind of what you wanted to do for the time.
Well, not really, but yeah, kind of. I mean, what I really wanted to do was just hang out in Paris and be in love.
How would you describe Paris at that time?
There were things that were scary about it because the policemen had these capes with lead in the bottom of them that they could beat you with. And there were uprisings. There were, because now we're talking 67, 68. And, so there were the students, but it was a wonderful life for young people because you could just kind of wander around the streets and be friends with everybody, and everybody was having these little uprisings and things. And then for lunch you could go to these great little the student places where you get a whole tray of delicious food and a little half carafe of wine, for less than a franc or something. But that was a problem because I didn't have enough money. I just assumed that I would be making art, going to the Atelier d'Isset, and that I would get a job. But I couldn't get a job either.
Why
Well, partly because I was 17 and I didn't really have any skills and anybody wanted it. It must have been it. I don't know.
What was that? I don't know if I'm thinking of a different time, but there were, like you said, some uprisings, or were there student protests? going on at that time in Paris? And
Yeah.
would you go to cinemas?
Oh, yeah.
Because that was all the French New Wave.
Well, yes, but I had started to be in love with the French New Wave back in high school in New York City.
Oh, really?
And that was one of the things that was so brilliant about New York City at that point. And we got out early on Fridays, and I still remember one Friday I went to, like, I got to go to a film, like, at 1:30 at one theater uptown, and then I could get to another one at, like, 3:30, and then I could go to a double feature. I mean, I ended up seeing 5 films in one day.
Wow, that's amazing.
I didn't usually do that, but you could do that, and a lot of these were just wonderful little jewel box theaters with. I mean, one of them they had a little espresso, and the 8th Street Theater, the Art Theater. Mm-hmm. Those were the downtown ones, but they had a couple of things uptown too. And it was just great, and I loved Breathless and Shoot the Piano Player.
Who was the French New Wave director?
Godard, but also Truffaut.
Wonderful. And so when did you decide that you were going to come back to?
Well, I was running out of money. And Chris, who was my boyfriend at the time, he was kind of running out of money too. And we had this plan that we would go to England, because if we went to England, where we really spoke the language. I mean, I had studied French, and I kind of thought I could speak French, but
was it still tough?
I couldn't pretend that I was actually somebody who could really speak French. So, but I thought I can really speak English, so maybe when we get there, we could both get jobs. So we went to England, and I was never so insulted in my entire life. Because we were on some boat going over the channel, and like these people are like, I mean, I really feel for immigrants, because they, like they were asking me how much money I had and this and that, and then they said that I could stay, but I had to check in with this like a probation, I mean, I felt like I was a criminal or something.
And this was like late 60s?
Yeah.
Wow.
And they didn't want me to be in their country. And, I wasn't a terrorist or a criminal or anything, but I just didn't look like I had a lot of money. I didn't have a lot of money.
But you kind of think people were still moving around at that time more.
Well, they were, and I did. I mean, they didn't not let me in. They didn't deport me immediately, but they basically made me feel like...
Just with the way they were asking the questions. And so you went to London?
Yeah. After Paris, London was terrible, I have to say.
Wasn't kind of like a drop?
Yeah. It was like February, March. It was gray. The food was terrible. The people were sad. Everybody was online betting on greyhounds. Oh God, it was like so sad. And I didn't see that swinging London stuff at all, really. I mean, I tried, but it was just sad. I ended up saying, all right, I guess I'll go home. And at that point, my parents were so chastised by the entire thing that they said, okay, I can go to the Rhode Island School of Design. So,
wow. So, but how long were you gone?
I left in November, and I got back like in March, I guess. So it wasn't that long.
No, but it's still a long time, and your parents were, like you said, so they're like, okay, you can go to Rhode Island School of Design.
Yeah.
So you got back and went there. What was it pretty open for what you could study? Or was it like studio arts, or you could pick a certain discipline?
Oh, I don't even remember. This is so long ago, and my record at Rhode Island School of Design is hardly more stellar than Barnard, because I only stayed for one semester. A part of it was when I got back from Paris, I really got very involved in what was going on in New York City art scene. And when I got to the Rhode Island School of Design, and the professors were all saying, oh, all those people in New York are just fakes and sellouts. I'm a real artist, and that person isn't. And I was like...
Kind of this weird academic way of Like, oh yeah, you gotta come learn what we're doing here, but instead of being out in with the art scene in New York City.
Yeah. So I guess I just wasn't cut out for school at that point. I was much more interested in my personal life and my personal explorations and making art, and didn't really think I needed somebody to teach me anything.
Yes. So you came back to New York City and got involved more with the art scene.
Mm-hmm.
And how would you describe the art scene at that time in New York City?
Well, it was very very active, you know. I mean, I just remember, like, you know, every week there would be all these different openings, and you know, everybody sort of knew which ones were you likely to get shrimp and wine and all that kind of stuff, because, like, you know, nobody could afford to actually eat dinner, so
where you can get some snacks.
Yeah, free snacks and wine, and then everybody went to, there were certain bars. You went to Max's Kansas City, or you went to St. Adrian's, or you went to Finelli's, or and people did that. But then the other thing is that there was a lot of political ferment going on, and there was this thing called the Art Workers Coalition, and they had meetings like once a week, I think, or once every 2 weeks, and so, like, it was kind of like every night there was like some activity. You know, the museum openings also, and you know, there was a lot going on, and people were quite passionate about things too, and would argue. I mean, that was the point of going to these meetings and bars, was to argue with people about things,
different topics, and
yeah.
And you were living in Greenwich Village?
No, I was not living. I mean, when I got back from the Rhode Island School of Design, I moved in with not Chris, a different boyfriend, and I guess actually we did live in Greenwich Village for a brief time, and then in Brooklyn for a while, but I ended up in Tribeca.
And because people today will say, well, what's your art practice that you were working on that at that time? But you were meeting with people, socializing, going to galleries and
right. But
events.
My practice was weird and probably very. I've never been good at having like a practice where I do something.
It's like, oh, they're known for doing this specific.
Yeah, I mean, at some point I was really, one thing I was doing. Well, I was doing two kind of very separate things. One was like, I did this thing, like I invented something called a perigee parallax press, and I used to make like these little collages and sort of almost like concrete poetry and little things, and in editions, sort of, and then I would send them out, you know, like I had a list of people that I sent things to and things, but that was kind of little private things, sort of, except then sometimes it turned into something else. Like one thing I sent out was, somewhere around here was Earth Day got invented, and I was living down in Tribeca, so I sent out this thing inviting everybody to come and make a garden together, and they had just knocked down, and there was this big empty lot, and I said, let's make a garden or something. And so then that became sort of a happening or an event or performance or something. So I mean, I did a number of different kinds of things like that.
And did you attend any protest related events that were going on in the area, or whatever was going on throughout the United States at that time?
Yes. I was thinking about this the other day. When Martin Luther King was assassinated, there was a kind of a very spontaneous gathering that we were all at, and then we decided to march down to City Hall. And we were marching down to City Hall, and that was the one time I got like almost mowed down by mounted policemen. Things, you know.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you're still kind of late 60s, early 70s?
Yeah, it must have been late 60s, yeah.
Was New York City changing at that point, or had already started to change in terms of, because obviously there were always artists coming and going, but there was kind of people leaving the city and new people coming into the city. And obviously the people will show pictures of the area in the 60s or 70s of certain parts that were more gritty or...
Oh, when I first moved to I lived on Greenwich Street in Tribeca, and it was it was a wasteland. I mean, there was
Really?
like nothing there. It was crazy, and I lived in this building that used to be actually the market. There had been a Washington market there, and they moved all those people to Hunts Point, and then there were just all these little brick buildings, and I was actually there when they destroyed them, which was kind of fun to watch. It was very sad in a way, but they did this cool thing where they had these cables, and I guess they put them on beams inside, and they attached them to these like bulldozers or whatever. Two of them would go off in different directions, and the building would go.
Oh,
It was like very exciting. Yeah, they didn't do the wrecking ball thing; they just did the pulling apart thing. So then in front of me, I mean, it was great loft because I was on the top floor and I looked out over the Hudson River, over this field of rubble.
Wow!
It was very beautiful, but nobody else lived there, but there was these, I guess, day workers or something who had used to work the market, but they didn't want to go to Hunts Point or something, so they just hung around in that neighborhood, and everybody was like, "Oh, aren't you scared to be down there?" And it was, no, these were the nicest guys, and what they did drink, and when it was cold, they had like these trash barrels, I guess, full of stuff burning, and they would stand around passing a bottle back and forth and staying warm and everything. And I always felt that they were a nice presence on the street, and I always felt like if somebody was following me from the subway, I would just go to them and they would save me.
Yes, that's interesting because, like, I guess you definitely heard people ask you, like, "Oh, do you feel comfortable walking around there at night?" And
people say that in Greenport.
I say that.
Oh,
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up in New York City. What can I tell you? People don't make me uncomfortable, generally speaking.
And so, moving forward from there, you continued to live in New York City for a while.
Tribeca for quite a while, and that's where my 3 children were born.
And you continued being involved in the art scene in New York City.
Yeah.
And I saw you were a member of the Women's Artists in Revolution.
Not so much that one. I mean, I knew them. They were part of the Art Workers Coalition, as was I. But there was the Ad Hoc Women's Committee. And the Guerrilla Art Action Group. So that was something I was part of. And Art Strike was a big thing that I was part of. But a lot of this we were protesting against the war in Vietnam. The Art Strike came up about really right after Kent State. That was the big thing there. But some of the other ones were also about racism, and some of them were about the fact that all these museums and galleries were not showing work by women in any proportionate number. And so, I mean, it was complicated, but there were some sort of national big P political things, and then there was kind of internecine small p political things, and they were all going on simultaneously. And we were trying to fix everything, which is what young people ought to do.
Yes.
One thing that we did with the Art Workers Coalition, and then I had a gallery at some point called the $100 Gallery, and my idea was I would sell work, and all the work that I would sell, each thing would cost $100, and I would only take, I don't know, 10% instead of like most galleries were taking 50%. And when you bought a piece of work, you had to sign the artist rights agreement with it, which meant that, I mean, because this was one of the things that made artists really mad at that point, was like if somebody bought your art, they could do whatever they want with it, and if you wanted to borrow it back for a show at a museum or something, usually people would say yes, but they could say no. There were lots of things that were it's like I think we were against the idea of the artwork being a commodity. We were trying to make it into something that you're paying to have this, but you don't own the idea and the soul of it, or the soul of the artist who made it. You just and you got a sign there. So as you can imagine, it was actually very successful in a way. At first, I got a lot of press on it, and I did sell a lot of things because I knew a lot of people who had big reputations. So people could run down to buy their work for $100 because they bought them from Castelli. They would have had to pay $1,000. So, so it worked in a way, but it did not work as a sustainable business model.
In terms of income coming in.
For me, I was doing it in my living room.
But that's, I've seen that before where people use spaces, whether they're living in it as a gallery space or to host events.
Probably works better when you don't have 3 children under 6.
That was probably tough.
Well, it was, but it was, worth a try.
And so how long did you end up staying in that apartment?
Well, it was a loft, not a regular apartment, and that we couldn't really we didn't own it, so the landlord just kept hiking the rent up, and so at some point we really just couldn't afford it. We had to move out. Before we moved out, we actually split it in 2 and rented half of it out. But then that was awful because then it was too small. And then
they didn't have any rent control?
Not for lofts at that point. There were various things were beginning to happen, but when we first started with the whole loft situation, it was all done completely illegally by everybody.
Yeah.
It was very hard to do if you didn't have a lot of money. And and things were gentrifying. These lofts that, my first loft, I paid $100 a month rent.
If you could say, what was it rising up to in terms of when the person was for the loft by the end of the time when you're like, this is too much money?
Oh, it was probably about 700 or 800 or something like that. But that was really too much.
That was a lot at the time.
That was a lot at the time. Too much for us. So my husband had never lived anywhere for very long, and he was an avid fisherman who liked to go surf casting and had spent a lot of time on Long Island. So, and he had a friend who had a place in East Marion who said, "Oh, there's this building that you've got to buy. This building, you cannot refuse, and it's in Greenport. You have to come see this building." And I think at the time that he first said this, I was pregnant with Lily, and it was considered to be a dangerous pregnancy because the first 2 kids were twins and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, I wasn't supposed to travel. So Fraser came out and looked at this building and bought it without me
talking to you.
Or and I, meanwhile, I had known that we really had to move from there, and I was willing to move even to Brooklyn, or
not that this far out.
So it was really hard for me. It's really dragged out here, kicking and screaming.
Through your whole time living in New York City, then had you ever visited the North Fork or the South Fork?
Oh, I had been coming to the South Fork a lot since I was a kid, but I don't think I'd ever been to the North Fork. No, I had no idea.
So that was definitely something you didn't want to do.
Right.
You wanted to, at least Brooklyn would have been better, because you could still go into New York City, and so you ended up moving out to Greenport.
Yeah.
Wow. So that was definitely a shock.
Yes, it was a bit of a shock, but it was, it all turned out pretty wonderful. The building was this laundry building that had had a fire. So it took a few years to actually make it habitable. And in the meantime, we stayed in the loft in Tribeca for a while longer, and then we moved in. The laundry had a little building next to it that had been the dry cleaner, so we moved into that building while we fixed up the laundry building, and it ended up being pretty terrific.
And what year was this?
1982, when we moved out here.
And how would you describe Greenport at that time?
Well, it was a lot like Tribeca had been. I mean, it was very gritty, very wild. I think about every other Friday night, the glass window in what is now called the Whiskey Wind was broken by people having drunken fights.
Wow.
We had our own police at that time in Greenport, who were kind of famous for all the things they did and didn't do. And it was pretty wild, but it had its moments. I mean, it's not lovely it was a lovely place to bring up the kids, actually, anyways. Although, Tribeca would have been fine, too.
Yes.
Or Brooklyn, maybe.
Did you, when you first moved out here, would you go back and forth to the city?
I swore I was going to. But, I mean, first of all, that would be time and money. Two things that poor artists with 3 children and a house to renovate don't have. So yeah, no, I swore I was going to go in all the time, and then I really didn't.
So at that time, were you just home?
At first, I think I was mostly just at home with the kids.
Just at home with the kids.
I did end up getting a bunch of interesting jobs to tide us over at some point. As soon as Lily got into like some kind of nursery school or whatever it was, I could do some things. I ended up being a bookkeeper for a while, which I thought was pretty amazing because I wasn't a bookkeeper type exactly, but apparently I could do it, so I did that. And then I had a friend who had a funny store where she sold art supplies and things like that. I worked for her, and I did things.
And when did you decide to get a master's?
Well, at some point, I did have enough time. I thought I would. I looked in the paper, and there was an ad for a job at the library. So I walked on over here and applied for the job, and it was a part-time clerical job. And this was when the library was just small. It was just that part.
No renovation.
No renovation
or expansion.
Expansion had taken place. So I started working, and I think I started working in February, and then in June of that year, the woman who had been being the children's librarian decided to quit, and the summer reading program was the big thing that the library did. And the director at that time said, "Do you think you could do the summer reading program and be the children's librarian?" And I said, "Sure, I could do that." So I did that. So then I was made children's librarian, and I was made full time. And I really enjoyed it. But I realized, and I was fine at that time with the board, that they didn't care that I didn't have any degrees whatsoever, I guess. But I guess I still had it in my mind that I might want to live somewhere else sometime. And I kind of thought, well, I should get the credentials so that I could actually have this kind of, now that I've discovered that I like working in libraries and I actually like being a children's librarian, pretty much, I should probably get a degree, because that's what I was seeing. Because we used to meet, all the children's librarians would meet and all that kind of stuff, and I realized they all have these degrees. So okay. But of course, before I could even go to graduate school, I had to finish up with my college education. So it took a few years.
And when you first started working at the library, how would you describe the environment? Like you said, it was smaller, but how was the environment and the community that were coming into the library at the time?
Well, I think, the library has always had, most of the people who work in the library have always had the right instincts about library, but you're fighting against tradition all the time.
There were other ways to have the children interact without being so, just stay there and sit. And let me read to you. But there are other ways to have
I had a video camera. We made movies. I had them play different parts from fairy tales and things like that, and they did their own versions, and we did things with rap, and I worked with I tried to a cast at that point was in the village, and so like I did an after school thing with kids there, and we did a lot of interesting things, different things, and it was there's always a little push pull about stuff, and trying to get rid of fines and trying to make it so people didn't have to show 8 different kinds of ID to take a book out, and trying to make it so you didn't have a rule like you could only take out
a certain amount.
Yeah, and all that kind of stuff,
And just in general, when you moved out here, did you feel, because I think at that time there were other people moving out here, some people from the city or other areas, but did you feel like you were an outsider or some prejudice as someone that's like, oh, that's someone from the city, they're not local?
A little bit, but
not.
I don't let that sort of thing bother me. I mean, I remember at some point there was like a Boy Scout dinner or something, and everybody was supposed to bring something, and it was just sort of fascinating to me. I hope it was fascinating to other people too, but I mean, I brought homemade bread because that's what I was into at the time, which I think people thought was very weird, and other people brought things like Jell-O salad, with bananas in it. I thought it was weird, but we share.
Yes.
And, we may think each other are weird, but there we all are at the Boy Scout dinner, being friendly. It's okay with me.
Yes. And so you were the children's librarian?
Yes.
For how long?
I don't know. Years and years and years and years and years. And then, but then Lisa was the director, and she wanted us to be even more professional and things. So she hired an actual reference librarian. And then when that woman left, she hired another reference librarian, who's Joe, who everybody knows, Joe Cortali. He was wonderful, and he'd been a school librarian working with children. And after he'd been working here for a while, I don't know, we just sat down and we had sort of a confab and figured out that he would probably like to work with children, and I would like to, because I think at that point I was already like assistant director, and I had also been branching out and I was doing YA. So I was doing children and YA and assistant director job and everything. And I would, maybe I was a little tired of doing children's at that point. I mean, I loved it. I loved the children and stuff. I didn't always like collaborating with the school, which is, I think, part of the job. And I figured that Joe would be better at collaborating with school because he already could deal with schools. My history with schools was not good. What can I say? And I did try, and I did do it and everything, but I was frustrated a lot because I kept on having all these brilliant ideas, and we should do this, and we should do that, and all that. And I was
just pushback from the school.
Yeah, but very bureaucratic and annoying. And well, of course, I already had a reputation because I was also a mother of 3 children in the school, and they knew me from my interactions with them as a parent.
Yes.
So they weren't always happy to see me coming with my brilliant ideas about what they should be doing. I don't know. Anyway, we decided that maybe Joe should be the children's librarian and I should take over reference.
And you said about the computer age. When did you get computers into the library?
I don't really remember that at all. I mean, I know we did. but
at
as to
some
when, I
point,
don't know. At some point, yeah.
And you were also involved. I think was it 1999 was the expansion. You were involved with the expansion project.
Yes.
Was that in the works for a while before? Had they been talking about that?
Everybody been talking about it forever because this is one of the constant troubles with a library is you want more space. And we just didn't have very much space. So it had been talked about, but it took a while to get all the ducks in a row.
Did you have any pushback with the expansion?
I think we did it very well, really. I mean, first of all, I think that the architect was very good at consulting with us, but I think he probably also consulted with people in the community, and we really figured things out ahead of time. They did a good job, I think, for the time. I mean, now.
No, it's kind of when you look back, it's like, okay, we need to maybe update this from that time of expansion, but at the time it was definitely cramped.
Oh yeah,
within the original building.
Yeah,
for you.
Yeah.
You were involved in other programs within Greenport, or that you started at the library. Were you involved with I don't know, this might be more later, but you also did the movie.
Oh yeah, we did the movies. Right.
Did you help start the music event by Mitchell Park?
Yeah, I think I did.
I thought I remember.
Right, no, yeah, okay. There was something called the Arts and Culture Committee. It was part of the village, and Gail Horton was the chair of that. But we did some great things. Yeah, the Arts and Culture Committee. We did these shows in Greenport in the summer when we invited these artists, a lot of artists that we knew from New York City, and people had to do site specific works, and we made these catalogs and a little map, and you went from one place to another and saw all these different works that people had done. Really cool. It was a lot of work though.
Yes.
So at some point we stopped, but I think we did it for like 6 or 7 years.
Wow.
It was pretty crazy.
And
but that had nothing to do with the library.
It was just your involvement with
the community. Yeah.
What other things were you involved in the community?
At some point, I was vice president of the PTA. We had a big thing about saving Moore's Woods because there was at some point they were going to sell off bits of Moore's Woods to people, and we said no. And yeah, and there were different things would come up. I mean, we did go to a lot of village board meetings, it seems, at some point, just to make sure that people didn't do terrible things to the. I mean, a lot of it had to do with the environment, and yeah.
And did you do dissertation on the library?
Yes, when I was in library school at Queens, I went to library school. I mean, a whole other part of my story is the fact that when you grow up in Greenwich Village, you don't know how to drive a car. So
there was no need to.
No. So I didn't really learn how to drive till I moved out here when I was already like 30-ish. So I never really liked having a car. Plus, we never had enough money to have 2 actual working cars at the same time. So in order to go to Queens, I had to get these twins who were also going to Queens, who lived in Greenport, the Walden boys, Jeff and John. Jeff is now the director still at Mattituck. And John is a director in New Hampshire, maybe somewhere. But anyway, they had decided to go to library school. I mean, Lisa and I talked them into going to library school, I think, and it worked out very nicely for me because then they drove me in and out because otherwise I could not have done it. Well, I could. I had started by going in on the jitney, and it leaves you off right across from Queens, and you could go over there, and then, but there's no way to get back that night after classes and stuff. So then I had to like go into my mother still had an apartment in Stuyvesant Town, actually, Stuyvesant Town. So I I would first of all have to get a bus to the subway stop, and then from the subway I would go into Manhattan, and I would arrive in Stuyvesant Town at around 12 o'clock at night, totally exhausted, and then have to get up and get on a train the next day to get to Greenport to get to work.
Wow.
By 10.
That's a lot.
It was a lot. So I was very happy when the Walden boys decided that they were going to go to graduate school. So we ended up doing our thesis. It was not a dissertation, but a thesis for the master's degree. We were allowed to collaborate. I mean, everybody in the class collaborated, but the three of us managed to do a history of Floyd Memorial Library.
Nice.
For our thesis.
Could you describe a little bit about what you discovered or learned about the library when you did that research?
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is that the idea of libraries had been around to a certain extent, but they were always like, and there was it started here with something called the Greenport Literary Society, really. So it was a bunch of books, really, and a lot of it seems like it had to do with ministers of a church or something would get young people to come together. I kind of think it was all about flirting and finding your mates. Really? Yeah. Before online dating, you know. Yes. So people would, but you had to read a book and then come together and like people put on little programs, like. And sometimes there was music, sometimes it was something else, but a lot of it had to do with books. And so they had this little, like a shelf of books that was kept at a millinery store. So like if you wanted to borrow a book from there, you could. Something. And at some point it was like you paid 5 cents or something. I don't know. Anyway, it just kept growing. And growing, and then it changed into a library society, and they have different rooms, and then at some point they had a librarian. But everybody thinks this is a Carnegie library, but no Carnegie. We never got any Carnegie money. What we got, though, was Grace Floyd, and she was a very nice spinster lady who was the granddaughter of. She was a great granddaughter of that William Floyd who signed the Declaration of Independence.
Yes.
Who never came to Greenport. Never had anything to do with Greenport.
Yeah.
So his grandson, David Floyd, built Brecknock Hall. And he was a rich guy who made more money with whale oil. And then he had children, including Grace. And what I heard is that she had a bit of a crush on the Episcopalian curate and was hoping to marry him or something, but he was not that interested. And she was going to give her money to the Episcopalian Church. But he disappointed her. So she gave her money to the Library Society so we could build a library.
Wow, I didn't know.
I heard.
I didn't know that. Wow.
It's not. I don't think it shows up in the thesis because we couldn't find, any written.
Yes. Wow.
Proof of that particular story.
No, and I think that always does get. Even today, people get that confused with. It's like it's not William Floyd, it's Grace Floyd that actually.
I know, and it got even more confusing when somebody found a picture of Grace's niece and decided that it was Grace, and also thought that she'd married her brother-in-law and various other things, too numerous to mention, but She was a maiden lady, and there's not any photographs of her or paintings of her that I can discover. And the painting that everybody thinks is her is not her.
No, that's interesting. But now, getting back to you at the library, you were working at the library, and then you had left Tribeca and with being an artist there. But were you still able to balance being an artist as much?
I've never been able to balance anything. Beginning with my checkbook. No, no, it's. I could blame it on all sorts of things, but it's really probably me. I just if I feel like a big need to do something, I usually manage to figure out a way of doing it. But I don't just do something every day to get something done every day. And there's been so many other things in my life that seem at that moment to be more important than spending time alone with some paint or whatever. I just don't do that very often. Now that I'm retired, I should be doing it more often, but I still feel like unless, I don't know, does the world need more stuff made by me in it? I mean, one thing that I think helped my attitude about this is when I did get divorced, I moved all the stuff out of this big, huge laundry building, including all my artwork and everything, into my mother's basement. And then we had a northeaster, and then we had a flood, and everything in the basement got destroyed. So it's like I just, okay. I love certain things, and I do sometimes just have to express my love by doing something. But a lot of the work that I've done that I've been most pleased with has actually been work that have been more performative or collaborative or organizing people to do stuff together, that kind of thing. So
not just your own, where you're expressing yourself through just painting or drawing or other sculpture related, where it's an involvement with other people or performative.
So yeah, I mean, I do those things sometimes, the drawings and the paintings and the sculptures and stuff. But I just I don't have a huge backlog.
And it's always tough to. It's like, when do you feel like you're in the right mood to do it? And it's like, oh well, not at this time. But no, that makes sense though. And I did have another question with the library, just in general. Over your time working at Floyd Memorial Library, what did you enjoy the most about working here?
Well, people and the books.
People and the books.
Those are the two things I like. Also, I mean, it was a great time to be, really moving a library from sort of 19th century to the 20th century to the 21st century. I mean, it was, I think that the library has come a long way during the time I was working here, and that was exciting.
Yes.
The whole explosion with the computers and really, yeah, I think a lot happened, and that was exciting. And I think people's attitudes about libraries changed too. I mean, I think it really has become much more of a community center in a way for more of the community than it used to be. People feel comfortable here,
Yes.
And welcome and things, and I think it was fun to be part of that whole evolution.
And in terms of just Greenport in general, since you moved here, has it changed over time since you first moved here?
Yeah.
Would you say for the better, or it was kind of a tough thing? Because even since the pandemic, but even before that, you've probably seen change in gentrification.
Yeah, well, sometimes I feel like gentrification is the thing that follows me around.
I don't know if they say that. I've heard people even say, well, artists move there first, and then people come after the artists have developed a community. They're like, okay, we're going to come in and change it for the worst.
Well, they don't mean to change it for the worst. They just come in and they just, they have more money.
They have more money, and they're like, okay, this is.
Yeah. I mean, there are things that I love about the way Greenport is now, and things that I liked about it before. I mean, it really was very gritty when we first moved here.
Yes.
And luckily, it's not quite so. I mean, I think it's a little bit more comfortable in some ways. But I also think that we are facing a lot of terrible dilemmas in Greenport, and I'm glad that Lily is on the board. I'm glad that Kevin is mayor, and I'm hoping that they'll get a grip on some of these things that need doing.
Yes.
But I think I mean, there's a lot of problems still to solve.
What do you hope for the future of Greenport? How would you?
Well, I'm very excited about the idea of having these arts centers, like the movie theater one, and then the one that in the auditorium would be great.
Yes.
I think that having places like that would be really good. And I really look forward to them figuring out what to do about too many huge vehicles on the streets all the time. Parking is not just a problem downtown in the summer. Parking is a problem on residential streets all the time, it seems to me.
I think I've discussed with people even the buses and trains, and I think people said the frequency of the train wasn't even as frequent as it is now.
I think it was.
You think it was?
Because it's not any better now. I mean, I keep on trying to figure it. I went into the city last weekend, and I was trying to I stayed with my brother overnight, and then we were trying to figure out how I could get back on Sunday. And I thought, well, maybe we should take the train instead of the jitney. And both of us were completely flummoxed by the website. You couldn't even figure out when the trains were running on Sunday, for one. And for two, I think there's still just 2 trains a day. Like, one is really early in the morning, and one is really late at night, and there's nothing in the middle of the day. So I ended up on the jitney. But yeah, I wish we had better trains. I wish we had better buses, for people who really depend on the bus. And like Harry Lewis takes the bus to work, and he's in a wheelchair, and he has epic times often trying to get to the bus, and the bus doesn't come, and the bus, very hard. I don't know. It just seems somehow they can do this in Europe, like in Europe, you have all these towns and villages where nobody can park on this. I mean, partly we also have very narrow streets. I live on a narrow street, Ludlam, and right off Carpenter, which I used to live on, which is also a narrow street. Back in the day when it was horses, it seems maybe it worked. And when people had normal sized cars, maybe it worked. But like right now, like everybody has a huge trucks
and
SUVs and everything, and people have to like get into somebody else's driveway to let somebody else go past. It's like, ay.
Yeah, it's just not a good, especially for our types of streets. Like you said, in Europe, they don't allow, I don't think, cars that big to be built, because they do have narrower lanes, and I don't know if it's just something with the car culture over here, but it's definitely an issue, parking and transit, because it's not going to get any better in the future. And like the mayor said, just look to the South Fork for our problems down the line. It's already coming.
Yeah.
But I wish they would, I don't know, talk with the Long Island Railroad. I guess it costs money, but it seems like it's something that they should be able to do. I know they've been working on other things they did the access to where you can now go to Grand Central instead of just Penn Station, but
that, you could do that on the number 7 train,
You didn't
need that.
You just need more times out here.
No. I don't know why they can't get that better together. But I mean, I just think because my brother actually lives in Bronxville, and that's, I mean, it seems like it's the same train system, but it's different. The Long Island Railroad is its own system, and it's berserk.
Yes.
Because you can figure out the Hudson line and the Harlem line and all those things. It's like all it's laid out, it's clever, they come on time, they come often, you can buy your tickets. I don't know. Why can't the Long Island Railroad work like that? Makes no sense.
I did have one other question. I was curious that as someone who grew up in Greenwich Village, what do you think of what Greenwich Village has become now as you've visited over the years and through the 90s, 2000s, 2000s?
Well, it's just very, very gentrified, but I mean, it's, it's adorable. I mean, everybody loves those streets with the little brick houses and the trees. And
when I talk to people, they say, "Oh, well, that's my favorite part of New York City," because it's just very different from the other parts.
Yeah, and it's not on a up and down grid. It's all crazy and
Yes.
everything, which is nice. And I mean, and it feels kind of European actually in many ways. It's a beautiful part of the town, but it has gotten just very expensive. I mean, like I said, when I lived there, it was not that kind of expensive. I mean, there was Lower Fifth Avenue sort of was fancy part, but then as you went west towards the Hudson, it was fairly working class, regular people and things, and great bakeries and lilac chocolate and all kinds of
Wow.
super things. But it was, now I think celebrities live there in great numbers, and it's just very. I mean, the other thing that was cool was how, it was one of the first neighborhoods that was really clearly okay to be homosexual. So it was, we had our whole gay pride thing going on there for a long time, which was,
yes.
I mean, that added to the diversity and things. But, again, it's like everywhere you go, there's always I mean, I think it was hard for that community sometimes to get along with the more established Italian church-going community there for a while. But I don't know. Then we all went to San Gennaro, and I think people do get along if you let them. But when everybody's priced out,
then it causes problems.
Yeah, and also I think the thing is that what's really weird to me about the super rich is that they don't really live anywhere. They have a house in Greenwich Village, and then they have a place in an island, and then they have a vineyard in Italy, and and they travel between all these places, which means that the places are empty half the time, and that's sad. And Greenport, I mean, we don't have it that would maybe the super rich, but we do have a lot of places that are empty a lot of the times because people just only want to live somewhere part of the time. And I guess I find that weird. I mean, I did spend some time being a kind of a rich person with two houses, and it drove me crazy. I never knew where did I would buy 2 or 3 mustards for one house and not have any mustard in the other house, and it was like, I mean, I guess if you're really rich, you have a housekeeper and you don't think about those things. But I like to live in one place, and I mean, I like to travel and go places or something, but but I like to live in one place and have friends and community and people that I know and all that kind of stuff. I don't understand people who don't want to live where they live.
Yeah, they're just, I guess they'll be like, oh, well, I'll pick the best part, or what they think is the best part of the year to be out here, or whether it's in New York City or somewhere. But we are seeing that here.
I mean, it's one thing for people who have to work in the city or something and live there during the week, and they're out here on weekends. I find that perfectly acceptable. I just don't like it when people are
gone for 6 months.
Yeah.
And it does, I mean, whether people think it or not, it does affect the community, because people will just say, oh, well, we don't need to do stuff at this time of the year, and we'll be open this time. So, but then for the people who really live here year round, that's not really fair.
No, and there are people who are basically homeless or have very poor living conditions. For them to see these houses empty, and then and then of course there's always people who just use their house as a Airbnb or whatever. That I don't understand either. But
no, that was really great to hear your story, and thank you for coming on the podcast, and thank you for your involvement in the community and also improving the library and bringing it up with growth and to the 21st century.
Well, thank you. This was fun. I feel like I talked way too much.
No, it was wonderful, and I loved hearing your story.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode with Poppy Johnson. I want to thank you for listening to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, and we'll see you soon.